Perfect. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. We are back with another bold chat today. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. And today we have Anne McNamara with us. We are super, super, super excited to have her today. So with that being said, Anne, if you just want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi. So I'm Anne McNamara. I'm the trumpet professor at Illinois State University in Normal, Illinois. I've been there. This is now my second year there. And I think we might kind of get into my history a little bit more later, so I can kind of go through that then. But that's my job. I'm a trumpet player. Um, yeah, and I'm really excited to be here this morning.
Awesome. So Anne, can you just tell us maybe a little bit about your upbringing?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm really the only musician in my family. I actually, aside from my husband, who I married, and he actually has more musicians in his family. But despite that fact, music has been a part of my life since like my earliest memories. My parents always really encouraged me. I started piano lessons when I was really young. Um, but I can't honestly say that I always loved trumpet and brass playing. It was more about like I fell in love with music in the first place. So, like I said, playing piano. I taught myself how to play guitar, and I was in a rock band in high school. In addition to playing trumpet, of course, in high school band and jazz band, I also picked up my grandpa's bass clarinet and played that in the second band in high school. So, music's always been a constant in my life. In terms of my education, I did my undergrad degree at James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia, and that was in music education. Straight from there, I went to the University of Illinois and got my master's in trumpet performance. And then after that degree, I took a couple years. I wanted to pay off some student loan debt. And I also I was kind of at a crossroads in my life where I was pretty positive that I wanted to go on and teach college and play professionally. But I had this music ed degree, and I was like, well, I don't know, maybe I should try the K through 12 thing. So I moved back home to Maryland, which is where I'm from, and I taught for 3 years. I taught fourth, fifth, and sixth grade beginner band and strings. And while I did love that, I loved working with students. Teaching's in my blood. It's one of the greatest joys that I have in my day. I did not love I didn't love the whole starting over every year with a new little set of baby beginners and showing them this is how you play E on a clarinet. Like, it takes a lot of patience. Those people have a spot in heaven someday. I knew that I wanted to go on and teach music at a higher level. So after 3 years of teaching public school, I went and got my doctorate in trumpet performance at the University of Maryland. So I don't know, with my musical upbringing, I feel like I've had a lot of varied experiences, several different types of schools of music. JMU is kind of like a medium-sized school. It's sort of similar to ISU, actually. Most of the students there are music ed majors, so I have a very strong teaching education background. The U of I obviously is a huge school, as is the University of Maryland. When I was at the U of I was one of 70 trumpet majors at that time, so that was quite a culture shift for me, coming as one of like 20 some at JMU. And then University of Maryland, even though the school itself is very, very large, the trumpet studio, the whole music school is a little bit run more like a conservatory model. So I think I was one of 12 to 15 trumpet students when I was there doing my doctorate. So a lot of varied experiences that I'm all really grateful for. In terms of my style of playing, I'm definitely a classical musician. I do have a minor in jazz for my undergrad. I love jazz. I can't say that I'm the world's best improviser. That's something that I wish it's kind of like learning another language. I wish I had never really stopped developing it. I thought I'd have more time the older I got, which is the opposite is true. So I'm a classical musician. My favorite thing to do is solo repertoire, giving recitals, that kind of thing. And in terms of like professional performance experience, I'm really more of a freelancer. I've moved a good bit for various teaching positions, and pretty much every place that I've lived, I've gotten into the freelance scene and played with some orchestras like the Louisville Orchestra, for example, but never held a full-time orchestral trumpet position. That's not really my bag. I like the solo chamber route. Um, so yeah, that's about me.
I love that. I didn't know that you had taught in the public school system for a few years. That's so incredible. That is definitely doing the Lord's work, you know. I love that grade level, and I love that you had that experience and then moved on, and you know, all of that applies when you're teaching higher education. So that's super cool. And
Yeah, I like to tell my students because I primarily teach music ed students. That's the bulk of my studio. So I like to tell them, I still expect you guys to do 2 hours of practicing per day. If I could do it back in the day, you can do it. Like I, I know how academically rigorous the music ed program is, but it was still instilled in me then, and I believe this with my students now that irregardless of what your major is, you want to be the best player that you can be. So it's kind of helpful that I can say that I practiced what I preach in that respect. So
for sure, and that is hard. One of my roommates was a band director, and she is the same way, always shedding too, and managing both of those lives. You know, you have to be committed. So that's really, really awesome. And I just wanted to touch a little bit about your freelance career. You mentioned that you moved around a few different times and got into the scene in these different cities. Do you have any insights or advice you could tell our audience about doing this or about your experience doing this?
sure, yeah. So yeah, I guess I'll elaborate on my background with that for a minute. So when I was a public school teacher in Maryland, that was really my first attempt at freelancing, I guess I'll say. So that was in the Maryland, DC, Virginia greater area. And so the way that I got started was just by reaching out to, a bunch of local musicians, a bunch of local churches. Actually, that was how I kind of started getting a reputation, was by getting hired by a bunch of churches to play various gigs. I think, and then, from there, like I said, I got my doctorate. My first college teaching position was at the University of Utah. I was actually a postdoctoral fellow, which is really, really rare in music. But at the time, the University of Utah did not have a full time trumpet professor position. The School of Music always wanted one, but it was just, for whatever reason, always adjunct. So that was kind of how they got a person in the door. And like my job was basically like recruit, recruit, recruit. So I lived in Salt Lake City for a year, and then I got my first tenure track position at Campbellsville University, a small little private Christian school in central Kentucky, Campbellsville, Kentucky. And I was there for 4 years prior to coming here. So I've freelanced in Maryland, in Utah, in Kentucky, Indiana area, and now in Illinois. And honestly, my freelancing so far in Illinois has been very limited because, as we all know, COVID happened last year in my first year here. Um, but yeah, I think the biggest thing is just trying to make connections with gigging musicians. And like I said, being open to church directors, getting gigs that way. If there happens to be a local professional orchestra, asking to play for the principal trumpet, in that, not exactly asking for a lesson, but being willing to pay for their time to listen to you play. It can kind of be a way of sort of auditioning without auditioning, kind of showing them what you can do. Um, and, those things have really worked for me. And then I think just with, this is probably kind of common sense, but with any gig that you get, bringing to that gig the best kind of energy you can. So being really well prepared with your part. I think I've kind of, I don't want to say made a name for myself, but I think where I've been successful is playing second trumpet to a principal trumpet very, very well. Worrying about tuning, balance, that kind of thing, checking in, making sure they're getting what they need. And if you can do that, then you're going to get hired over and over and over again, and being early and not talking too much and not being on your phone, like, just sort of simple things like that, showing a desire to be there. I think that kind of helps garner a good reputation for yourself. So
Awesome. I think that was like a lot of like really valuable um, experience and knowledge that you've just given us in terms of, moving around and how to, reconnect in a new area. And I know that earlier you said that you do a lot of solo and chamber playing. So we had a question about that actually. You commission and perform a lot of new works for trumpet, and we were interested in how you usually get started with that and your favorite parts of the commissioning process.
sure, yeah. That's a great question. So I guess when I first started sort of dabbling in this, it happened because a passion of mine is the flugelhorn. For anybody who's listening who's unfamiliar, the flugelhorn is a member of the trumpet family. It's, you know, typically pitched in B flat. It's like the conical version of our cylindrical trumpet. And I say I'm passionate about it. I think a lot of people have misconceptions about the instrument. I think a lot of people think it's just for jazz or it's just like that lyrical pretty instrument. And in reality, it can do all the same things that regular trumpet can do, you know. So I had connected with a composer, Carson Kuhlman. I had played several of his works on various recitals, particularly during doctoral school. And I had emailed him about I think his piece Nobody're Dreaming. I think that's the one that I reached out to him about. And I was just asking him some questions about it, and we struck up a conversation. He actually said, "You know, I love the flugelhorn. I've always thought it'd be cool to write a sonata for flugelhorn." And I wrote him back, and I was like, "Oh my God, I would love that," because there really isn't at that point. There hadn't been a full sonata written for the flugelhorn. There are some works out there that it's like trumpet on one movement, flugelhorn on another, but there to that point had never been a full-fledged, serious work for the flugelhorn. And so I kind of filed that away in the back of my mind. And once I got my first teaching position at the University of Utah and then transitioned to Campbellsville University, um, I learned a lot about the finances at a university. I was a little naive thinking that, oh, okay, I've got this position now. My school will pay for this piece and it'll be really easy. It wasn't so easy. Commissioning new works can be a pricey endeavor. And so it took me a little bit of time to get all those details worked out, and I kind of cobbled together resources from University of Utah, from Campbellsville University, and then I actually formed a consortium reaching out to I actually reached out to all of my former teachers at the various institutions where I went to school, and that together paid for that work. So the first work that I ever commissioned was Carson Kuhlman's Sonata for Flugelhorn and piano. And then the only other work that I've been fully responsible for is an adaptation of another work. So Kevin McKee wrote A Winter's Night for trombone and piano originally. And Kevin is a friend, and I actually reached out to him, and I was like, this piece is so beautiful. Like, have you ever thought about doing it for flugelhorn? And he's like, sure, let's do it. So that was really awesome. Otherwise, I've been a member of several consortiums. So one of the more recent ones is a piece that I did on a recital this fall called Light Form by Melody Edfosh. And that consortium was led by a trumpeter by the name of Marie Mencher. Coming up this fall, I have another work for flugelhorn that I'm a member of the consortium by Peter Meacham, and that consortium was led by Josh Ganger. So anyways, I think what's so great about the commissioning process is, in a sense, we're kind of giving back to our field, right? We're creating new music to play. And I think every composer approaches it differently. Some are really open to what do you want the piece to sound like, or what are your musical ideas? And some are just sort of like, I kind of want you're hiring me because you like the way my music sounds, kind of trust me to do my thing. And that's cool too. But I just think it's exciting to contribute to the field that way. And then you get the perk of getting to premiere a new work and get to do something new. So I hope to always be actively contributing in this way. I personally would like the next consortium next commission that I do myself to seek out, maybe a younger, underrepresented composer, perhaps, to kind of further getting some new voices into the trumpet literature scene. But I don't know. I think it's a very rewarding process. So
That is so amazing. I love how you said that it's commissioning new works is kind of giving back to the field of music. I haven't thought about it that way, but that's so true. Music is always moving forward with the times, and so it's like what you get, what you put into it. So that's really cool. Another thing that I liked was that you mentioned reaching out to your current community and colleges that you work for, as well as your past universities that you went to school with. And I think that that's something really important for us students to know, is that the worst that can happen is somebody says no if you ask for anything. So that's super cool that that's how you got your consortium commissions up and running.
thank you. Yeah, and I think that's like what you just said. The worst thing that someone can say is no, So it's all about just being polite and being like, hey, this is something I'm working on. I'd love to include you on it, and just seeing what you can get. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt to ask.
So kind of moving forward, we know that you hosted an online interactive faculty recital via YouTube, which included some notes from the composers. Could you tell us about this process, what it was like, what challenges you faced, and if you see this continuing as we move, into the light of the tunnel, the end of the pandemic?
Sure. Yeah. So, so the idea for this really kind of came out of necessity. So, thinking back to last summer and early fall, I really wanted to give a faculty recital. It's not required, but I think it's strongly encouraged, especially as someone who's on the tenure track and not yet tenured, right, to be doing a recital a year. For me, philosophically, I think it's really beneficial to give a recital per year for my students, again, so that I'm practicing what I preach. I think it's great to time it early in the fall semester so that any new students to the studio can see what I can do. But at the time, I was not comfortable with the idea of doing a live recital in front of an audience. We, kind of as the school year has gone on and we've all gotten used to like wearing masks and bell covers and socially distancing, we've kind of learned that that works and it protects you from the virus. But at the time, there were a lot of unknowns. And a friend of mine likes to do a lot of streaming using the website Twitch. And this is where I kind of first got the idea for doing something like this. And I actually reached out to one of our composition faculty members, Roy Magnuson, because he's really tech savvy. And I was like, what do you think about this? What software should I use? How could this potentially work? And he actually is the one who gave me the idea also to reach out to the composers, the pieces that I was doing, and ask for their input. So it was sort of a collaborative effort. I can't take full credit for this idea. So basically what I did is in late July, early August, I recorded 4 works. So I recorded Valerie Langfield's In Retrospect, which is an unaccompanied solo trumpet piece. Karen Tanaka's Silent Ocean, which is for trumpet and piano. Miles Per Hour by Regina Harris Bayaki, which is another unaccompanied trumpet solo. And then Lightform by Melody Etvosh, which I said I was a member of a consortium. So that's a brand new work for trumpet and piano. So I recorded those works on campus in our Performing Arts Hall. I did do live takes of them. I'm not really super great at splicing things. So the recordings that I used were live performances, but all of them weren't back to back. So I recorded them. I reached out to the composers and I said, hey, I'm doing this thing and it would be really great for us to hear directly from you, like kind of live program notes. And all 4 of them were really super responsive and they were like, oh, this is a great idea. And so 3 out of the 4 recorded just a short video of themselves talking about their piece. Karen opted just to send me her program notes. And so I just made a little screen with like her headshot with the written program notes for that portion. And then the way that I did this is I streamed the recital live using YouTube Live and a program called OBS, which is free to download. I had never used it before. I think it stands for Online Broadcasting Software. And basically what it allows you to do is using YouTube Live or Facebook Live or Twitch, you can stream your video content and it kind of has these like smooth ways of sort of transitioning between video that you've done and then you, just like we're talking now, live, doing like live video capture. And so it premiered like it would normally. I think it was like an 8 p.m. time on a Tuesday night. And of course my students were invited. Actually, my students were expected to attend, but it was for anybody who wanted to watch it. I think we had a little bit over 100 people tune in live that night, which is exciting. And then after the fact, I think I had several hundred views of it, which is pretty cool. But what was really neat about it is that I could interact live with the audience so that I could like view the chat, kind of like what you guys do with your podcast, right? But I could also play the recordings and play the recorded program notes from the composers. And it was a really great experience. I think what was unique about it was to see in real time people's reactions to the pieces, like what they liked about it, or it's always nice as a musician to hear compliments, but what I think is really special is as it's happening to see people's reactions to it. We don't get that experience when we're performing live, right? So it was interesting, it was neat, and our School of Music has adopted this style of broadcast this year in that I should also note at the beginning of the school year, our main performance hall didn't have the best live stream setup, but over winter break, they got brand new HD, great camera setup. So the live streams are really awesome now. So student recitals are live streamed and have a live YouTube chat, where people can chime in with their feedback or if they're watching from home. And our band concerts have been done that way as well. And in fact, one band concert during the intermission had a video play of an interview with the composer. So it's kind of cool that our School of Music sort of adopted this for this school year. So to your question, I hope this kind of thing continues. I think it's nice that we can have live streams that are a little bit more interactive. But for me personally, I'm planning on returning to a regular live recital next fall, because now that I'm fully vaccinated and a lot of other people are too, I think it's a little safer. So but I learned a lot from the process, and I think it was a rewarding experience for sure.
That's awesome. And I think we all want to return to that in-person experience, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
But like you said, I think that, figuring out the whole technology thing and figuring out how we can do things different ways and still make it work has been really beneficial to all of us. But on a little bit of a different track, not regarding any sort of broadcasting or anything like that. You wrote an article for I.T.G called "So Much Practice, So Little Time." And we were wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about that article, what it entailed, and then how it applies to your pedagogy as a trumpet educator.
Sure. Yes. So the sort of the impetus behind that article, what sort of inspired me to write it, were my experiences as a full-time band director, at the elementary level, also trying to maintain a freelance career. For anybody listening, if you've experienced this, it can be challenging to have a 9 to 5 job and maintain your chops, right? It's so easy to have a full work day and then come home exhausted and be like, I just don't have the motivation or energy to practice right now. But for anybody who's considering, maybe teaching for a little while and then auditioning to get into a grad school, I think it's important to sort of think about, well, how am I going to balance both of those things? And, even for people who are in school as music majors, we've already talked today about how extensive the music education curriculum often is and how busy our students are. So I think it can be easy to feel like, I'm so busy, how am I going to get my practicing done? And that's kind of why I thought to write this article. And at the end of the day, what it boils down to is just being really organized and being good with your time management. Something that I learned from Chris Carrillo, who is the current trumpet professor at JMU. He wasn't my teacher, but he's been a bit of a mentor for me. And he learned this from the person who actually came up with this idea, Dave Bilger, so principal trumpet of the Philadelphia Orchestra. He has this mnemonic for practicing that's called Safari, and it's misspelled. It ends in an E instead of an I, but Safari stands for sound, articulation, flexibility, agility, range, and endurance. And I also like to add in efficiency to that E thing. And so basically, on any given day, if let's say you only have 30 minutes to practice, or let's say there's another day where you have 2 hours to practice, as long as you cover that Safari idea, you have something that works on your sound, something that works on articulation, flexibility, etc. You kind of covered all of your bases for the day. And then I think it just comes down to like, how much time do I have? What's the most pressing thing that I really need to get done today to stay on track with my goals? Another thing that I talked about in that article was having a practicing journal as a useful tool, kind of keeping yourself organized. I've gone back and forth in my life between religiously keeping a practice journal and not. And in the times where I have kept one, what I've found to be really helpful is it's almost like I'm in a competition with myself. Like I tend to keep track of how much practicing I'm doing every day, and I tally it up at the end of the week and then at the end of the month. And I can kind of keep a running record of like, oh, July was a great practicing month. No surprises there. It's summertime. I don't have as much going on, right? Versus like, oh, October. Oh no, I didn't get as much practicing done. So kind of looking at it that way can sort of help keep you motivated as well. But I think it's all about having balance and making sure that you have sort of a to-do list in your mind of what you want to get done. It's so easy if you go into the practice room unfocused to not get things done, or to be distracted by your phone or by thinking about what's for dinner that night or going and hanging out with friends next. So I'm all about having as much organization as possible in your practicing routine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you nailed it when you said balance. I know that for me, I have to be doing fine up here and in my body, otherwise it's not happening on the trumpet. And I know that there are some people who, they say leave it at the door in the practice room, and I do believe that's possible to an extent, but you definitely have to take care of yourself before you can take care of what you need to do on the instrument. So the whole balancing is really, really important.
Absolutely. I agree.
Mm-hmm. Do you do any sort of like meditation or yoga, stuff like that to help with that sort of process?
I do. I have to fully admit I am not the best student of either. I don't I go through spurts where I'm really religious with it and I'm good and I do it every day. And then, life gets busy or I come up with various excuses for why I don't have time or don't want to do it. But no, lately I've actually been on a kick of trying to meditate just for 5 minutes every day. I'm married. I have a full-time job. I have a little boy who's about to turn 4. So there's plenty of excuses and things to pull my attention. But what has worked for me is I have a little alarm in my calendar for 8 p.m. because I tend to put my son to bed just shortly before that. So I'm like, okay, I don't have any classes at night. Most of the time there aren't concerts that I'm supposed to be tuning into or going to, right? So I've got this time now. And I just try to make myself take 5 minutes to sort of sit quietly. Sometimes I've used apps like Headspace, etc. But what really works well for me actually is just putting on some sort of ambient noise and then just trying to sort of quiet my inner thoughts. Maybe do like a little body scan kind of for any sort of tension that I'm feeling and focus on releasing it with my breath. But I have a very chattery mind. I think a lot of us overachievers do, right? Perfectionist kind of thinking. So I see it as a win if I can just get my brain to be quiet for a short period of time. Yoga's great too. I've really fallen off the wagon with doing yoga on a regular basis, but I do like it when I do it. So.
Yeah, I totally relate to that chatty brain. It's like, just stop. All right, we're doing something here.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you so much for speaking to that. I kind of wanted to go into your trumpet studio a little bit. You have such a great rep, your great studio vibe and great sense of community in your trumpet studio. How do you go about fostering that with your students, and how have you managed upholding that during the pandemic?
Well, thank you. I mean, I'm glad. I think because Kate came and did a masterclass a couple weeks ago for us, and so I think she got a little window into what we're like as a studio, and I'm glad that she had a positive experience. Her class was really great. I haven't been at ISU too long. This is just my second year here. So I think in many respects, I have to say it's just the students that I have. I'm lucky. I have a good group of people. I haven't had tons of time with them to develop, etc. So I think I'm lucky in that I inherited a good studio and a good size studio. Right now in the fall semester, we had 29 in the studio. We had a few go on and graduate or go on to other things. So now we have 24 in the studio. So it's a decent size. But I do have some things that I try to do by design to kind of set up a culture or set up a vibe. So both last year and this year, in the very first studio class of this, well, actually, I think the second studio class of the semester. I think in the first studio class, we're just talking about the syllabus and things that are coming up. But in the second class of the school year, we as a studio come up with our studio code. And so when we were in person last year, I split them up into groups just in the normal classroom where we normally meet. This year, of course, things being over Zoom, I sent them into breakout rooms. And I basically tasked them with, like, you know, what do we want to be known for as a studio? So, like, if you're walking through the School of Music at ISU and you overhear someone talking about a member of the trumpet studio, what do you want them to be saying about you, you know? And that's really all the guidance that I give. And so they, in small groups, kind of discuss different attributes, and then we come back together as a group and sort of like brainstorming together. We throw some of those ideas up on the wall. So, you know, they come up with things. I actually, if I had thought, I would have brought it with me and I could have actually read what we came up with. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly, but things like, of course, being professional and well prepared in an ensemble setting or rehearsal setting. But they honed in on being open to receiving critique, you know, and being willing to kind of grow from that, not get defensive from receiving critique. Being there for each other, being there is like in terms of an emotional support. And we've had discussions about this where it's, I don't want, the last thing that I want is for there to be a fake vibe in the studio where, like, they know that I want them all to be nice to each other. So there's this kind of like fake pleasantry vibe. No. You know, we don't all have to get along. We don't have to hold hands and sing Kumbaya. Okay. As trumpet players, often we are competitive individuals. It's not always going to be that way. Right. But I do think we need to be respectful towards each other. And bottom line, like, how is everybody doing on an individual level? You know, if you see a studio member struggling, whether that be, you know, haven't we all struggled with motivation during the past year with this pandemic? You know, whether it's like burnout and fatigue, or it's mental health struggles, or you know, other personal things going on, just not being shy about reaching out to that person and doing a check-in, like, hey, are you okay? You know, so those are things that we talk about in studio classes, like, what are these values that we hold together, and how can we kind of call each other out when we're deviating from that code. Something that I'm just starting to introduce now is having an open studio concept where anybody can observe anyone's lesson at any time, as long as it's okay with the student in question. For me, it's okay. I don't mind being observed. And the way that I've done that this semester is I've required all of them to observe one student per semester. And I'm hoping that, especially once things are in person, I'm hoping they just get more and more comfortable with having their lesson crashed by somebody else. And with the idea being that, bare minimum, if someone else is observing you play, it might kind of put you on the spot a little bit more. You might, okay, I'm going to try my best here. But also, I think we learn a lot from observing each other. You know, what went well, what didn't go well. Sometimes I could be saying the same thing to the same student week after week after week, but then if they hear me say it to someone else, it clicks for them in a different way. So I'm trying to encourage things like that. What's kind of cool is this semester, the students have started kind of doing trumpet ensemble chamber stuff on their own. So, for example, I have a grad student who's pulled some students together to work on some lead trumpet playing, and they're working on a lead trumpet arrangement that they're going to play in our last studio class of the semester. And I also have, I didn't say a word about this. This was all their idea. All the women in the trumpet studio have decided to form their own female trumpet ensemble called the Valkyrie Trumpet Ensemble, which is pretty cool. So it's that kind of thing. I hope it just continues to grow where it's, I philosophically, I don't feel like being a dictator really works. I'd rather it be more like I'm a facilitator and they are really sort of shaping the studio the way that they want it to be. So, you know, it's a work in progress, but that's kind of my philosophy on that in a nutshell.
That's incredible. I really love the studio code. What do you want the studio to be known for? It kind of reminds me of the safari thing. It's like, okay, these are the basic tenets of our studio. You want to treat people with respect. You want to make sure you're prepared. You know, the very basic things you want to do every single day. So that's kind of like a similar idea.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's, some of it I think is common sense, but everybody comes from lots of different backgrounds, lots of different high schools, or any of my grad students that I have come from different undergrads. So it's kind of just like, it sort of just sets the tone. Like, these are our minimum expectations, and so irregardless of someone's background, we're now all on the same page with what we want to do, and then we're all human beings. We're going to make mistakes. I think as their leader, it's important for me to try and lead by example and do the things that I want them to do, and also be willing to admit when I make a mistake. Like, I think that's important as well. I'm not one to sort of posture or pretend like I know it all. I don't know it all, and I learn from my students every day. So I think just kind of trying to foster that it's okay to not know all the answers as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. So now I kind of wanted to shift over to your album. Could you tell us a little bit about A Winter's Night? There's a link up above in the description where you can go check it out. So yeah.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for that plug. I appreciate that. Yeah. So, A Winter's Night came out in spring of 2019. Spring, kind of ironically, with the title A Winter's Night. But that's named after that piece by Kevin McKee. It's on there. I had always wanted to do a CD. I actually hope to do another CD in the next couple of years. And again, kind of, I mean, being honest, it's a little bit of self-promotion for sure. It's a way for people to hear what I can do as a player and performer. But I also think, again, it's important. It's a way of kind of giving back to the field, providing recordings of works that may or may not otherwise exist, So on that particular album, I have A Winter's Night, which is a commission of mine. I have the Flugelhorn Sonata by Carson Kuhlman, so another commission. And those are both the premiere recordings of those works. The other tracks, the only standard on there that had already been recorded was the George Antheil Sonata. And that's just a piece that I really enjoy. It's a little bit underrepresented. I don't think everybody knows it in terms of a trumpet sonata, so that's why I chose to include it. And then all the others are pieces that I really liked that had not been recorded up to that point. I think the Storyteller by Jim Stevenson has now since been recorded by someone else. But at that point, I'd been the first person to do it. So basically just choosing pieces that I really liked. So it's got Tony Ploeg's Scherzo on there, Storyteller by Jim Stevenson, which is a beautiful work, a tribute piece to Bud Herseth. And then another work by Kevin McKee. Oh my gosh. The Horizon. I can't think of the title right now, but for two trumpets and piano. And what was really special to me was to get to record that piece and the Storyteller with my teacher, Chris Gecker. He was super generous with his time and willing to do that with me. So, it's a labor of love. I paid for that CD out of my own pocket. It took several years to do it. I think moving forward, if I record another one, I will try to fund it with a grant. But it was just important to me, I think, both just for building my own portfolio and people getting to know my playing, but also, again, to try and give back to the field by having some recordings that hadn't previously existed. So.
Amazing. Thank you so much for talking about your album. And anybody who wants to check it out, again, we did drop a link above in the little blurb that we have. So at this point, I just want to ask anybody else on Facebook, anybody watching, if you have any other questions, now is the time to drop them in the chat. And Anne, we are going to ask you our final question that we ask all of our participants. What does your ideal brass community look like?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And so just to clarify, like for me, like my brass community, people that I can ask for help, or do you mean like a studio or both, or like?
All of the above. We want you to interpret the question the way you want to interpret the question.
Okay. Well, I think, an easy, perhaps obvious answer, but an important answer is a diverse one, you know. And I think all of the events of the past year have really brought that into focus, how just important it is to have different voices, different people from with different backgrounds, you know. And as speaking as someone who comes from a fair amount of privilege, it's sort of a shame that a lot of events of the past year had to happen for me to think about it differently. But it's one of those things that I think once you learn it, you can't unlearn it, or you shouldn't. It's just made me think about things a little differently. So by that, I mean, like, I want to learn from people who are older than me and have a lot more experience than I do. I also want to learn from people who are younger than me and have less experience. You know, like I said, I learn from my students every day. I think, of course, you know, racially diverse, sexual orientation diverse, gender diverse, you know. It's so easy when you are in kind of a think tank of like-minded people. Like if I'm just hanging out with my friends in my comfort zone all the time, it can be kind of like an echo chamber of like everybody's confirming your own beliefs. And I think it's much more important to be challenged and to learn about different walks of life. So, you know, in terms of brass, you know, I want to be able to talk to somebody who's performed in an orchestra for several decades and learn from them about that experience. Similarly, learning from someone who has played in pit orchestras. I mean, that's a very different thing from anything that I've ever done professionally, and that's it can be a grind, and I'm kind of curious about how someone copes and deals with that. But also just, you know, again, wanting to learn from people from different walks of life. So I don't know, I think the best way to do that is to you know, reach out and meet new people. So it's cool to meet you two for the first time today. Like I said, I met Kate a couple weeks ago for the first time when she came and did a masterclass for us at ISU. COVID makes this a little difficult in some respects, but I think that's also why it's so important to attend as many professional conferences as you can. So, you know, my brass community got that much larger the first time that I went to an International Women's Brass Conference, you know, and that was really meaningful for me to see all sorts of women brass players. You know, certainly there are a lot of us that exist now, but growing up, I was always the only girl in my trumpet section. So it was neat to kind of learn from it that way. And I love the International Trumpet Guild. It's a conference or it's an organization that's important to me, and I have a lot of friends and colleagues from that group. So I love going to the conference every year. You know, I don't know. I think it's just important to try and learn from as many different people as possible, and being open to perspectives that are different than yours. Not always an easy thing, but I think it's important for growth. So.
Amazing. Thank you, Anne. And thank you for everything that you just said. I agree. We have to learn from each other, and that's pretty much the end of it. So with that being said, again, thank you for being here, and we are excited to keep up with you and see what you're doing in the future. Again, if you're interested in Anne, her website is up below, as well as her link to her album. And then lastly, just a couple of things about what's going on with Brass Out Loud. We are doing a virtual fun run, 5K, 10K, 15K, whatever which one you want to do. If you are interested in running with us, registration ends on May 15th. You can register at our website, brassoutloud.com. And in addition to that, we also have a donations link. If you ever want to donate to us, all proceeds are going to funding our next workshop, which we are super excited for and in the planning phase right now. And then lastly, if you want a long sleeve shirt or a crew neck, we do have a couple left. We don't have a lot, we only have a few. So if you are interested, message us on Instagram, Facebook, send us an email, and we will hook you up with one of those. So with that being said, thank you everybody for being here today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne.